In this module, we will analyze quotations to introduce students to varying viewpoints on the causes and effects of exploration and expansion into the Americas, Africa, and Asia. In this module, prior to instruction, students will read, discuss, and gather ideas. In this module, we will utilize World History Standard 10, analyze the causes and effects of exploration and expansion into the Americas, Africa, and Asia to demonstrate the instructional activity from the S3 strategies group known as Circle of Five. Throughout this activity, we are able to assess students' prior content knowledge while integrating multiple information processing skills such as analyzing primary and secondary sources. Circle of Five can be used to preview an historical event or to predict what might happen as a result of an historical event. This activity is perfect for the inquiry-based social studies classroom. You, the teacher, will serve as the facilitator, while students explore upcoming content through the analysis of quotations that lend themselves to deeper study. For this activity, you will need at least 6 quotations that are relevant to the standard. As you might predict from the name of this instructional activity, students will work in groups of 5. If your class size is larger than 30 students, you will need more than 6 quotations. The directions for this activity are as follows. Teacher directions. Step 1, find quotations. You will want to pull quotations from reliable sources. A few favorites are Google Scholar, News ELA, Google Books, and Galileo. Google Scholar is an online, freely accessible search engine that lets students look for physical and digital copies of articles. Google Scholar searches a wide variety of sources, including academic publishers, universities, and preprint depositories. The articles have been peer-reviewed and are suitable for compare and contrast of opposing viewpoints. Google Books is a great way to expose students to informational text without the fear of landing on a non-academic or a for-profit website. Through performing a Google Books search, you will have access to 10% of the copyrighted books that are already scanned into the web database. This means you will not have access to the entire text, but you will have access to a portion of the text. There are several great titles already included in Google Books, and more will be added as the project continues. Here's how it works. Rather than completing the typical web search using Google, simply switch your search from web to books. Your search will result in excerpts from copyrighted text across the globe. Step 2. Create 5 sets of each quotation. Remember, we are selecting at least 6 different quotations. Number the back of each set of quotations 1 through 5. Student cooperative group roles will be assigned based on the number on the back of the quotation. Each student group will be assigned a different quotation. Students within the same group will receive the same quotation. Step 3. Prepare to distribute quotations to student groups. If you are concerned about how every student can actively participate in this activity, when the time comes to assign groups and/or distribute quotations, you can be purposeful about the quotation that each group of students receives and which student receives which role. We will discuss student roles in the student directions portion of this video. Student directions. Students will form a circle of 5 by working with others who have the same quotation. Prompt students to look at the back of their card. On the back of the card, students will find their assigned number. This number will help identify designated roles. In this activity, students are to identify the author and understand specific information about the author, and if that matters in terms of the assigned quotation, the audience, who is the intended audience based on the quotation and the knowledge of the author. What's significant about the time period? What was going on during the specific time period of the quotation? Vocabulary specialist. Which terms help us understand the quotation and which terms are difficult to understand? And lastly, why is this quotation significant? Once students understand the role assigned to the number on the back of the card, you will need to provide a few students with additional roles. One student will need to read the quotation aloud for the group. One student will need to keep the group on task. And one student will need to share with the whole group or all of the students in your classroom when prompted. So what does this look like with students? Student number 3 will read the quotation aloud to the group. It is important that the student read the entire quotation as well as information about the author. Student number 1 shares the author information. If the student knows something about the author, he or she will continue. If the student does not know anything about the author, he or she may ask, "Does anyone know anything else about this author?" It is our hope that other members of the group chime in with information that they know about the author or speaker. Student number 2 will make a prediction about the intended audience based on the quotation and the author information. As students dive into their roles, be sure to walk around the room to facilitate conversation. Students may be a little quiet the first time around. Encourage discourse. Any attempts at conversation will strengthen opportunities for inquiry in the classroom. Student 1 shares the author information. If the student knows something about the author, he or she may continue. If the student does not know anything about the author, he or she may ask, "Does anyone else know anything about this author?" It is our hope that other members of the group will share what they know or even ask questions. Student number 3 will provide information about the time period. Once student number 3 provides information, other students are free to chime in. Student number 4 will serve as the vocabulary specialist. He or she will identify terms that help understand the quotation. He or she will also identify terms that are difficult to understand. When the time comes for the group to share, it is important to record these terms. When students are able to create the word wall, they are more likely to learn new vocabulary and use it in both an historical and a worldly context. Student number 5 will explain why the group's quotation is significant. Once he or she is finished, the group will share information in a whole class setting. There are a few ways to modify this activity. Prior to creating student groups, preview quotations for troublesome vocabulary and for knowledge that students may or may not be prepared for. Then strategically create those student groups. This is a great way to differentiate amongst students based on ability, prior content knowledge, or the need for remediation and/or enrichment. Another modification of the Circle of 5 activity is to allow students to research the quotation based on assigned roles. We know that students may not have any prior content knowledge. Let's not have that be an obstacle. Give students the opportunity to use their computer, to use their cell phone, or to use teacher-selected resources to find out more. One important part of this activity is to have each group of students share information about the assigned quotation to the whole group. A great modification is to ask students to draw conclusions based on each quotation. Throughout our lesson, we then will ask students if their conclusions have changed. If students have changed their conclusion, give students an opportunity to provide information as to why that conclusion changed. If students' conclusions do not change, have students do the same. Use the evidence to argue why their conclusion will stay the same. Lastly, if you like the idea of having students collaborate to predict why these quotations are significant, or even to predict the relationship between each speaker, create new groups using the Jigsaw grouping model. During our first phase of this activity, student groups were created based on a particular quotation. In phase 2 of this activity, students will form new groups. Now, there must be 5 different quotations in each group. Rather than share out to the whole group, students will be responsible for sharing the information gathered in their first group with students in the new group. Students will complete the process, however. Each new group member is now the expert from the old group. Students are now encouraged to share information that they learned while in their first group. Concluding thoughts. The activities shared in this module can be modified to meet the needs of all students. The activities shared in this module can also be adapted to fit other world history content standards. Remember to utilize Georgia Department of Education curriculum resources to support your work with students.